Hey everyone, my name is Matt Loayza. I'm the Dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Wanted to welcome you all to the SBS Insights series, in which we're going to have a series of episodes that feature a professor who's involved in unique research and broader work focused on public service and addressing social issues. So today I'm joined by Dr. Jameel Haque, who is the History Department Specialist in History of the Modern Middle East. Among his many duties are he's currently the director of the Middle Eastern Studies and Islamic World Minor. He's also the director of the Kessel Peace Institute, whose mission is dedicated to advancing the understanding and the existence of peace at all levels, from the individual all the way up through the global community. And I had the pleasure back in my teaching days of being a department colleague of Professor Haque. So it's really just wonderful to have you here, Jameel. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Dean Loayza. Glad to be here.
So, with the pandemic still a big part of our daily lives, what are you doing in your spare time?
Matt, you and I have had a lot of conversations about athletics, and I'm normally a pretty good racquetball player, but because of social distancing, I had to take up a new sport. So I've been playing a lot of frisbee golf. And here in Mankato, we have a very lovely disc golf course at Land of Memories. And that's one of the things I've been doing. I've also been trying to enforce my retirement from adult league soccer. I almost broke my hand last year. I'm a goalie. And I'm trying really hard to make that one stick. I don't really want to go back.
Oh, so no comeback in the works?
No comeback in the works, Matt.
No. Well, if maybe I have spare time, you can see my comeback for C League hockey when hopefully I get a chance to do that again when the fall comes around again. So, well, Tal, we've talked several times about this, and I'm familiar with your work. But knowing that your current research focuses on how various cultures are represented in textbooks, so wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and maybe starting with why you see this as a important issue and decided to take it up as something you wanted to look at more closely in your own work.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I've been a world history teacher now for over 10 years, and when I started out at City College in New York City, which is part of the City University of New York system, we had an assigned textbook to teach world history. It was Robert Tigner's Worlds Together, Worlds Apart. So we really didn't have any choice over our curriculum, and read that book over and over again. And when you read something over and over again, especially on a topic as vast and broad as world history, you really start to become sensitized to the words and the information in the book in a way that one reading or two readings wouldn't be. And I became very aware of the way the book treated Muslims and Islamic history differently than it treated, say, the history of Western civilization. Western civilization narrative is sort of the narrative that we're taught from our normal high school and middle school history, that civilization is progressive and predominantly comes out of Western and Northern Europe. And looking at the textbook for these biases, particularly anti-Muslim bias, I found so much information. So I was able to get support from the university, from Minnesota State University, Mankato. I received the Presidential Teaching Fellow Scholarship, and I wrote my first article about this topic, writing about 6 world history textbooks. And I looked at them for 2 issues that I called grafting and mirroring. Grafting is the idea that in the transition from the Western Civ narrative to the world history narrative, they just kind of stick parts onto that narrative, onto that story. And the parts don't make sense with the rest of the story. You're not abandoning this Western Civ narrative, which argues that progress comes out of Northern and Western Europe. What you're doing is just sticking extra parts on. And then mirroring is a reflection of our society's conscious and unconscious biases against Muslims. So I'm now continuing my research by looking at the John Green's Crash Course in World History videos. These videos will be familiar to anybody who teaches in high school or middle school, and anyone who's a student within the last 10 years in high school or middle school, and looking at the same issues. And these are issues that are very problematic, because they suppose that somehow Muslims and Western civilization are opposed to each other. and that creates problems in the way we think of our history, especially because history, even though it's a story of the past, is really a reflection of what we want to be in the future. And if our history is not inclusive, if our history doesn't have diversity, equity, and inclusion in it, then it creates a problem within the mind of the student.
So I'm wondering, when it comes to grafting, I've been familiar with that since an early age. My dad's from Latin America, from Bolivia, and growing up in New England, it's drilled into our collective heads at an early age that Plymouth Rock, 1620, Puritans, so forth. Miles Standish, the whole 9 yards. And my dad, I think at some point really early on, pointed out that St. Augustine was founded by the Spaniards and predated Plymouth Rock. And I think at some point in elementary school, I brought this up as like, all right, well, sure, we'll include that. And then you just kind of move on with the rest of the interesting, like nice story, bro, and then move on, right? So
Right.
I'm wondering, are there any specific examples of grafting that you've seen kind of across the board in textbooks when it comes to Islamic civilization?
One of the really interesting ones comes out of sort of the Middle Ages, and two interesting points. The first is about Islamic Spain, and there'll be a chapter in the book which will talk about Islamic Spain as this flowering of cultures, flowering of knowledge, and say, oh, there were libraries in Cordoba that were larger than any of the libraries in Europe. It doesn't say any other libraries in Europe. It says the libraries in Europe, even though Cordoba is very squarely on the European peninsula, continent. So that is a problem. It creates this artificial boundary. It's as if when Muslims come into Spain or when the Ottoman Empire goes into the Balkans, that area suddenly becomes no longer part of Europe. There are countless examples of that. Another example is that although textbooks are now starting to pay attention to Muslim scientists and talking about how Muslim scientists influenced the birth of medicine, modern medicine, how Muslim scientists influenced Copernicus and his heliocentric model, those acknowledgments only exist on chapters about the Islamic world. As soon as the book hits the quote unquote scientific revolution, those scientists, their contributions, even their very existence gets forgotten. So then it's just the standard Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, all suddenly inspired by nothing but their own brilliance, discover these ideas, when in reality, they were, as Newton acknowledged, standing on the shoulders of giants, and many of those giants were Muslims and also Jews that were in Islamic Spain or in Central Asia and contributing to what became then the scientific revolution in the textbooks. Those are some examples. I mean, I could go on all day.
I bet you could, right? Well, actually, I think maybe what strikes me is that I know you've done a lot of work right here at MSU to really offset a lot of the grafting and mirroring that you've seen in textbooks and broader education, because I think that really helped motivate you to create the Islamic World Minor, right?
Absolutely. There are very few courses that have anything to do with the Islamic world at our university. And there certainly wasn't any way to integrate them together. So proposing a minor, it's a 16 credit minor that students take, and it's composed of history, political science, art, and English courses. It was geared to and marketed both towards our Muslim population at MSU, as well as a population of people who will be working with Muslim populations in the future, particularly here in Minnesota, future law enforcement, future nurses, future teachers, future social workers, to give them a broad understanding and contextualized understanding of the experiences of the populations that they'd be working with and for, as well as for the Muslim students to be able to see themselves reflected in the curriculum is very empowering. And I've found that usually my courses, I teach Islamic civilization and I teach foundations of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and I teach history of the modern Middle East. These three classes typically enroll with about half students who identify as Muslim.
So, and it sounds like that's really been a great success. I've had a chance to sit in on one of your classes, and we've talked a lot about it. I mean, have you found do you use a lot of the examples of grafting and mirroring in those classes and talking about representation?
Absolutely. And I actually had a graduate student who just graduated actually use my research to write his paper for graduation. That was a fascinating and both humbling and overwhelming experience to have somebody you're working with actually work with what you created. Um, we do talk about it a lot, and I think the understanding the students have of history, no matter where they grew up, is inescapably that narrative of Western Civ. And this is a well documented transition from Western Civ, which was created about World War One during the World War One period, to world history. This happens in the 1970s and 80s. Happened in 1979 at MSU. Um, this is very well documented historically that basically people just said erase the name of the Western Civ course and wrote world history on it, and they just added a couple parts onto it. So we're very aware of that in the textbooks that we work with, including Tamim Ansari's Destiny Disrupted: A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes, which is an excellent book. I highly recommend. Try to overcome that, as well as just a critical. When you give the textbooks or the books that we have a critical reading, you find that bias, and the students will find it on their own if you just alert them to the fact that it's there. And I usually give assignments like that to the students to either identify the biased parts of history or to try to identify the missing parts of history. Where are the dark spots that have been left out of the history books, and how do we try to include them? Is always an important question that we ask.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a non-historian and trying to explain a lot of current topics that we're talking about every day in education. And the topic of cancel culture came up, and what I was trying to explain was that the initiatives that you're working on, for example, um, isn't really the cancel culture, since you had mentioned missing and erased elements. It's more the response to the OG of cancel culture that happened many decades or many generations ago, right?
Absolutely, and I give these examples to students. Uh, um, when Magellan, right? As world historians, we have to know everything about everything. We have to be able to talk about everything. So when Magellan sailed around the world, right? When the textbooks say Magellan sailed around the world, here's this Portuguese navigator sailing for Spain who makes it all the way around the world. None of that's true, right? It's almost incredibly unimaginable that this is what students are taught. Obviously, we know Magellan doesn't make it all the way around the world. Only 20 of the 200 people that came with him survived, roughly. And the first person who actually sailed around the world was on that journey. And he was an enslaved person who had been kidnapped in the Philippines or islands near the Philippines or Indonesia. And during the trip, he had been kidnapped there and brought to Spain and Portugal as a child to learn the languages. But when he realized that he was home, when he realized that he had accidentally been taken all the way around the world, he ran away, right? And he's gone from the history books too. Or when Edmund Hillary climbs Mount Everest, right? Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, other than the Soviets getting to space or the Americans getting to the moon, one of the real crowning achievements of mankind's fight against gravity. And he gets up there, and great, that's fantastic, and that's in the history books. But Tenzing Norgay carried all his stuff for him, right? And he's not in the textbooks. Whenever we talk about Lewis and Clark, they don't talk about the enslaved person they brought with them who carried all their stuff. We're actually trying to correct the historical narrative rather than to cancel it. And through these inclusions, again, history is where we want to be as a society, as a civilization, and a culture. It is not an accurate representation of the past. It can never be. Too many things happen for us to really record everything in history. But if we're going to say that we want to be an inclusive society, an equitable society in the future, we need to correct the way we look at the past, because all these things are in our past and we need to highlight them. We need to bring them out, and we need to teach about the contributions of all the peoples of the world rather than just a selected few that are in the Western civilization narrative.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And I guess for any of our viewers out there that might have heard or wondering, what's going on with Western Civ and college level history classes, for example, it's not that you're just canceling it. It's more, instead of, I guess you could say, instead of just focusing on the legend of the quarterback, you look at everyone and really just try to get a more um, as much as you can, a more accurate perspective on the past as we, like you're saying, look to the future. Um, I think if we can kind of segue to another part of your very busy work, that whole issue of representation comes up, I think, pretty well in your efforts as the Kessel Peace Institute director. So could you talk a little bit about that, and maybe if you like, just a little bit about the Sibley Park Initiative?
Absolutely. The Kessel Peace Institute has been around since 1993. It's named after Dr. Kessel, who was a professor here at MSU for quite some time, and he dedicated his life to peace and social justice. And the institute tries to carry on his work and his memory here in Mankato. And particularly after we went into lockdown last year, I had just taken over the institute from Dr. Carol Glasser, who did a fantastic job before I took over. Um, I had a real chance to really sit down and think, well, what does the institute want to do? Normally, we would be sponsoring speakers, we would be holding events on campus. None of these things were possible, so I decided to do a couple of things. The first thing is the launching of a new online journal for educators K through 12. This journal should be out and online by the summer, and just providing resources for teachers who want to teach about peace. One of the other problems of the way history has been recorded, and I think you might agree with this, Dean Loayza, that we overestimate the effects that wars have, and we underestimate the effect that people who are practitioners of peace and long periods of peace, that we underestimate the effects of this in history. So that's what I'm looking to do with that. Then after the murder of George Floyd, I really took a hard look around the Mankato community and thought, well, how can we make Mankato a more inclusive and better community for the children that are here today, who are going to be our future? And Mankato is a town that's becoming more and more diverse. We have a very diverse school district, and as these kids get older, we want to see them reflected in our town. And for those of you that have been to Mankato, you have seen the silo art. It's fantastic. It's very inclusive and it's gorgeous. And that guy that did it was amazing up there in the snow on a giant crane. It terrified me just to look at it. But I thought, well, what can I do? And I'd heard about Sibley Park. Sibley Park is our sort of keystone park. It's our best park. It's got a little petting zoo. It's got some it's got a great band shell. It's got great playgrounds. It's got space to run around, and it's right along the water. And I had heard about it, and I had learned that during the course of my living here in Mankato, which I've been here for 6 years now. I had learned that this was actually the site of the imprisonment of Dakota people after the Dakota War in 1862, and this was also the location where trials took place, where 400 of them, around 400 of them, were condemned to die. And Abraham Lincoln intervened and ended up Sibley, Henry Hastings Sibley, who later went on to become the first governor of Minnesota, ended up executing 38 people in what became the largest mass execution in American history. But the fact that the park is named after Sibley, who did execute these people and who wanted to execute hundreds more, and that the trials actually took place within that park, and the park is named after Sibley, it is a problem. And so I've been partnering with local groups, including indigenous leadership groups, to work on getting the park renamed. And it's met with some serious resistance. I'd say the community is pretty much split 50-50 about whether or not we should rename the park. And we're going to continue working on it, though. And we're doing it not in an aggressive, you're going to ram this down your, force this through kind of way. We're trying really hard to build a coalition of people to get everybody on our side. And I've given presentations multiple presentations around town to groups that I think would agree or would disagree with me about this issue, and trying to get everybody to have a voice in the conversation. So we're hoping to move forward with that more this summer. And hopefully it's coming in the near future. Sibley Park will hopefully be renamed soon.
Jameel, thank you so much for joining us today. Just telling the audience a little bit about yourself and sharing your research with us. Everyone, thank you for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about Dr. Haque and his work, which I highly recommend, you can visit the Department of History website at sbs.mnsu.edu/history. And for more information on this faculty research series and to view upcoming episodes, you can visit sbs.mnsu.edu/insights. Thanks very much and hope you all have a great day. Thank you.